Hi, my name is Chris Brennan, and I'm here at the United Astrology Conference where I'm doing interviews with different astrologers in order to just get a sense for what's going on and talk to some of the leaders in the field today. So joining me today is Michael Erlewine, who's the founder of Matrix Software. Hi, Michael.
Now, do you want me to look at the camera or you?
Either way, but usually we're just looking at each other.
Okay.
So how's it going? How many UX, have you been to every UX so far?
No, but I've been to bunches of
Okay.
them over the years.
And so you actually founded the first astrology software company, right?
I was the first person to program astrology and make those programs available to anyone.
Okay. And when did you start, or what year was that?
Well, I started in the early 70s. In 1972, four-function calculators, that was when they appeared so that we could buy them.
Okay.
And I first did it with those, just showing how you could use a four-function calculator. And then I did it later with programmable calculators, but the first home computer appeared in 1977.
Okay.
And so that's when I wrote my first program. I wrote an entire program that did Helio and Geo and a couple other things in 8K of RAM.
Wow.
Which is like, we press one key now, it uses 8K of RAM.
Right.
So
And you did the whole program with just 8K?
with 8K.
That's crazy. So right away in 1977, you are already in the game, and your company quickly became, obviously it was the only, but for a long time it was not just the only, but it was the biggest software company, especially once things ramped up with personal computers in the 1980s, right?
Yep, it's true. It's true.
And at its height, how many subscribers or how many customers did you have?
All I know is I was busy doing it. I was told that over the period of years we had 30,000 customers. I don't know how many of those were repeats or what, but that's a bunch.
Yeah, that's a good chunk of the astrological community, especially since you primarily would have been serving professional astrologers who wanted to not have to basically calculate charts by hand, but be able to do them more accurately and more quickly with computers, right?
But they were very shy about this. There were quite a few people who didn't like the idea of not being able to use log tables and ephemerides because it had become almost a meditation for them to do it on paper.
Sure.
But then there were a lot of people that were really relieved. And for instance, when we first began to introduce written reports, people were really upset. I can remember one conference, it was a UAC or AFA, I don't remember which, where we had Charles A. Jane was my closest friend as an astrologer. We would have panel discussions that would go all day instead of lectures. So we'd have a bunch of people, including the audience. And they have a room monitor, and we were talking about written reports. And the room monitor was standing there crying. They were just the monitor. They didn't come to hear it because they thought astrologers using written reports was the end of astrology as they knew it. But really, and many people echoed that, but quietly, under the counter and behind the scenes, they would come to me and buy them and use them because they could sell $5 or $10 or $15 worth of astrology where someone wasn't going to pay them $100 for a whole reading. So there was a whole lot of shyness about, but everyone used them, but they didn't want to be known to be using them. But then after a while, it was okay.
Sure, and that's actually one of the questions today, and I'm always curious how people like you feel about that, where sometimes I've heard older generations of astrologers lament that sometimes with some of the newer generations, they don't know how to calculate charts because they've always used software at this point, and I was wondering if you feel like that matters or if it isn't really that big of a deal because the heart of it lies in the interpretation.
I think that there's no point in my worrying about that because it's done.
Sure.
They're not going to go back and learn how to do it by hand, even if the lights went out. So I just think that it's one of many things in the world we live in that just water over the dam, and we're already into it, and it's happening. Right? We're not going to do that anymore.
Sure, and then...
I don't think they miss anything either.
Right. Yeah, they probably missed a lot of... I mean, it probably...
Tedium.
Yeah, a lot of tedium, and it's probably saved a lot of time and allowed astrologers to do a lot more charts. So did Matrix, when you were involved in it, it must have been, especially the early 90s, was sort of like the peak of the business before the advent of the internet?
Well, yeah, sure. And as things begin to move onto the internet and we begin to implement chart calculations on the internet, then, I mean, a recent group of astrologers, even your age, are a little younger than you. Some of them don't even own an astrology program.
Sure.
They do everything on the internet.
Right.
You know, I made a special program for the do it, but Astro made many different options. And people just use that. They don't even have a program. They don't even have a computer program on their computer.
Sure.
Which I can't imagine because I love working on a computer with it.
Right.
Yeah. So, but it shows how old I am.
No, I mean, I still appreciate having a dedicated program like your program, like Matrix, on my computer or even on my phone, rather than always having to pull it up from the internet or have a web connection.
But you realize that many people now don't.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people just use, whatever online program, AstroDienst or what have you, to calculate charts. But yeah, there's pros and cons. So when you were doing Matrix, it seemed like one of the big things that you did is you were still very community oriented, and you hosted a number of conferences, right?
I did.
Okay.
I did 36 conferences, not all on astrology. It was either on astrology or it was on Dharma, Buddhist teachings. And yeah, we had wonderful conferences and had a wonderful time. I mean, great. I mean, all the great astrologers, were there.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of them. Michelle Gokhale, John Addy wasn't there. Charles Harvey, Robert Hand, Lee Lehman. Just goes on and on and on. John Townley.
Right, and you even, the Robert Schmidt actually came into the community partially through working with you initially, right?
Robert came and lived with us for 2.5 years, if I remember right, and he was mainly thought of himself as a theoretical physicist or mathematician. Wasn't clear to me what he was, but in our conversations, gradually he became more and more aware of astrology, and at least he told me that then he became an astrologer, or whatever we want to call him in astrology, but a researcher in ancient languages anyway.
Sure, and eventually I think he met up with Robert Hand at one of your conferences, and eventually him and Robert Zoller the three of them went on to form Project Hindsight?
Exactly.
Okay, brilliant. So it's like you've been at the nexus. It seems like a lot of astrologers' paths intersect with yours, and you act as sort of a nexus in the community where a lot of important stuff has happened. And I know another thing you've been interested in is archival and libraries, right?
Totally.
Okay. And you recently donated, was it a large portion of your library to
It was
a
almost
university?
all my library except for some duplicate books that I want.
Mm-hmm.
It took an Allied Van Lines full truck and a UPS-sized truck. All of it was donated and given to the University of Illinois as part of their permanent collection. So they now have thousands and thousands of books and magazines that we know are protected and that we can go and see. And it's now a permanent part of the collection. So,
Okay.
and that's just one collection. As an archivist, I also archived all recorded music. And my collection of music CDs is 700,000. That's in Ann Arbor, and then I could go on and on. I won't waste the time here, but I've archived many different things, including music, rock and roll posters, Buddhist teachings, all kinds of stuff.
Sure, and you said you actually have a large archive of interviews with astrologers that have never been released, and we've talked a little bit about finding a way to get those out.
Yeah, I'm doing it, and hopefully you're going to use some of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And finally, and your library originally, it was called the Heart Center, and that was around for a few decades, but
Right.
it was probably the largest astrology library in the country or in the world at one time.
I don't know, but I know that it seems to be the largest one in this country, and I can't imagine anywhere in the world with anything larger.
Sure.
But I don't know.
So it's actually very significant then that you donated that to the university, because that means that they're going to have just a huge collection of astrology books that would be preserved permanently in that collection.
Absolutely, and they also wanted all of my papers and correspondences.
Okay.
And they have all of those. Took a whole truck just to carry that stuff.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks a lot for sitting down with me today. What are you working on, or what are you doing right now? Is there anything you're excited about or looking forward to in the future in terms of things you're doing or thinking about?
What am I doing right now? I'm here at UAC, not selling anything, having a little booth and meeting with people like yourself. What I would like to do is try to understand where astrology's going right now.
Sure.
And I don't know whether you have time for this, but what I am understanding from being here is that people like yourself, many people are going into ancient, classic languages like Greek and Arabic and Latin and stuff like that. And I'm wondering why. And here's what I think is why, which might interest you, is that I believe that the introduction of the internet and smartphones and all of the stuff has been so profound for us as a change that it's raised the level of excitement and distraction to such a degree that it has suppressed our natural sense of intuitiveness, and that many people are unclear about their direction. They lost their intuitive compass, and they're going into ancient languages or other things to try to find some direction, or try to find some nugget of gold, of wisdom, or whatever it is. You can some other time I'd like you to tell me what you're doing in that regard. But I think that in a few years we'll settle down. This whole thing will become normal, and I think that then I think our intuition is subtle and it feeds us gently, and if we get too excited, it's suppressed, and it's like a compass. We get our directionality from inside, and I think that it's not strong now, and I think that it will be again.
Sure.
But anyway, those thoughts.
And one of the things it seems like that you've used to keep you centered is you focus, especially of a particular interest in Buddhism, right?
I've studied Dharma for since the late 50s, but seriously since 1974, when I met the great Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and he took me in a room and taught me how to meditate, even though I don't know what the heck he was doing.
Sure.
But I made it a rigorous practice, so that I went and did all the things that one does under direct supervision for many, many years.
Okay. Wow. And that became a sort of lifelong focus of yours?
Well, we've run a Dharma center since the 80s.
Okay.
And it's, we have a whole building, 7-bedroom building that's just dedicated to that. But many astrologers live there too, like Robert Schmidt lived there for a while as well.
Brilliant. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for